The day it all started to unravel was the day of the annual Founders' Day picnic. The air, thick with the smell of grilled hot dogs and freshly cut grass, was a perfect slice of Americana. The high school marching band was playing a slightly off-key rendition of a top 40 hit. And my brother, Leo, was glowing. He stood beside his husband, Julian, a proprietary hand on the small of his back, beaming with a kind of pure, unadulterated pride that made my heart ache. And Julian, well, Julian was performing. He moved through the crowd of town elders and young families with the practiced ease of a politician. His smile as bright and hard as the diamond on his finger. He'd only been in Northwood for 2 years, but he'd already become its golden boy. He remembered everyone's name, asked about their kids' college applications, and spoke about his new tech startup, Athelred Innovations, with a vague but thrilling jargon that made old men in tweed jackets nod thoughtfully, as if they understood what synergizing the blockchain with hyperlocal logistics actually meant. I watched from the shade of a century-old oak tree, a half-eaten paper plate of potato salad sweating in my lap. "He's something else, isn't he?" Leo said, coming over to me, leaving Julian to charm the mayor. "I mean, look at him. He's got the whole town eating out of his hand. He certainly has a way with people," I said, and the subtext hung in the humid air between us, thick and unspoken. What I meant was, his stories don't add up. His charm feels like a costume. He looks everyone in the eye, but I've never once felt like he's actually seen them. "Oh, lighten up, Leo sighed, that familiar frustration creeping into his voice. "Just be happy for me. For us." He squeezed my shoulder, and I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Love had made my brother blind, and my worry, to him, just looked like bitterness. Later that week, the cheerful ghost of the picnic had faded, leaving behind the quiet reality of my life. My apartment, situated above the town's main street, is my sanctuary. It's small, meticulously ordered, and smells perpetually of old paper and brewing tea. It's where I can retreat from the world and just be Eleanor Vance. The librarian, not the tragic older sister. Not the family's keeper of memories. That night, the distant, mournful cry of the 9:15 freight train was the only thing breaking the silence as I sat at my small writing desk to pay my bills. That's when I saw it. An envelope from the bank. Thinner than the rest, I slid it open with my letter opener. Inside was the check I'd written 2 weeks ago. My own check, from my personal account, made out to the Northwood Cemetery Association for the annual upkeep of our parents' gravestone. And stamped across the front, in a violent, jarring red, were 2 words: insufficient funds. But the check hadn't been drawn on my account. It had been returned because the payee's bank, the Cemetery Association, had tried to deposit it. And the check I wrote to them had bounced after they tried to cash it into their account, which was linked to a joint account that Leo and Julian used for household expenses. Where I'd sent the money, I froze. Leo was meticulous. He would never let the account for our parents' final resting place run dry. It was our one shared, sacred responsibility. My fingers, already tingling with a faint, familiar numbness I'd been trying to ignore for months, felt clumsy as I picked up my phone. I dialed Leo's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice breezy and distant, the clink of glasses in the background. "Hey, what's up?" "Hey," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Listen, something weird happened. That check for Mom and Dad's plot, it bounced." A pause. "Oh, man, really?" he said, the concern in his voice thin, stretched over a foundation of dismissal. "That's so weird. Julian handles all the finances. You know that. I'm sure it's just a mix-up. We just had a huge wire transfer come through for the startup." So the bank. The Zelle notification had pinged on my phone less than an hour after I spoke with Leo. The money for our parents' gravestone was there. The problem erased with a few taps on a screen. On the surface, everything was fine. Leo was happy. His texts over the next few days were full of cheerful photos of him and Julian on a hike, raising champagne glasses at a celebratory dinner for the new investment, living their beautiful, curated life. But for me, the quiet hum of dread that had started with the bounced check had not subsided. It had settled deep in my bones. A low-frequency anxiety that followed me through the hushed, orderly aisles of the Northwood Public Library. My world is one of tangible, verifiable facts. It lives in the scent of aging paper and wood polish, in the weight of a first-edition hardcover, in the rustle of turning pages that sounds like whispering ghosts. The library is a fortress of certainty, a place where stories have clear beginnings, middles, and ends. For the first time in my life, the story of my own family felt like a book with crucial pages torn out. And the empty spaces screamed at me. The mail for the old Vance family home, the house our great-grandfather built, where Leo and Julian now lived, was still forwarded to the library's P.O. box out of habit. I was the keeper of records, the family archivist. It was a role I had accepted without question. That Tuesday, as I sat in the back office sorting through the usual pile of circulars and utility bills, I found it. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, the kind designed to look both important and innocuous. It was from a company I'd never heard of, Apex Financial Group, and it was addressed solely to my brother, Leo Vance. Not to Julian, not to both of them. Just Leo. A tremor of cold went through me. I told myself it was nothing. A credit card offer. Junk mail. But my intuition, that quiet, persistent voice I had learned to trust over the years, was screaming. My hands, which had been feeling strangely stiff all morning, trembled as I slid my letter opener under the flap. It wasn't my mail to open. I knew that, but it was my brother's name on a letter that felt wrong. And my duty to protect him felt older and more urgent than my respect for his privacy. The single sheet of paper inside was cold and clinical. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "Second notice, account past due." My eyes scanned the details, my blood turning to ice. It was a personal loan for $50,000, taken out 3 months ago. The interest rate was a staggering 18%, a number that was nothing short of predatory. The payment was 32 days late, and the sole signatory, the only person legally responsible for this mountain of debt, was my brother. I sank back into my chair, the heavy silence of the library pressing in on me. $50,000. Leo was a high school history teacher. He made a comfortable salary for Northwood, but he wasn't a man of means. He was fiscally conservative, a trait inherited from our father. He hated debt. He wouldn't buy a car he couldn't pay for in cash, let alone take out a loan of this magnitude without a word to me. He wouldn't, he couldn't. As my mind reeled, a terrifyingly familiar sensation began to creep into my hands. It started in the tips of my fingers, a pins and needles feeling, like they'd fallen asleep, but it didn't stop there. The numbness spread, a wave of fizzing static, crawling up my wrists and into my forearms until my hands felt like they didn't belong to me anymore. They were clumsy, foreign things at the ends of my arms. I tried to grip the edge of the desk, but the wood felt distant, muffled. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and the rows of books on the shelves seemed to tilt ever so slightly. Stress. I knew what it was. My doctor had given it a name I wasn't ready to accept. A name I hadn't even spoken aloud to another soul. He'd told me to avoid stress. It was like telling someone in Massachusetts to avoid snow in January. The loan notice trembled in my numb grasp. This was more than stress. This was a violation. This was a 5-figure secret in my brother's name. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that he didn't know about it. Calling Leo was pointless. He would have a dozen excuses, all fed to him by Julian. He would accuse me of snooping, of being dramatic. No, I had to go to the source. The puppeteer, not the puppet. I texted Julian under the guise of having some other mail for the house. A few packages delivered here by mistake. Are you in town today? His reply was instant. Finishing up a big meeting. But can swing by the library around 4? Would love to see you. J. The casual warmth of it, the breezy sign-off, made my skin crawl. At 10 minutes to 4, I took the loan notice and walked out to the main reference section. I sat at one of the heavy, imposing oak tables, the silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock by the door. The towering shelves of leather-bound encyclopedias and town histories rose around me like silent, stoic witnesses. This was my domain. Here, I felt grounded. Julian breezed in at 4:05. A gust of expensive cologne and Boston confidence. He was wearing a tailored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Ellie," he boomed, his voice too loud for the sacred quiet of the library. He leaned down and kissed the air next to my cheek. "So good to see you. Leo tells me you were worried about that little check thing. All sorted, I promise. Just a silly bank error." He was trying to control the narrative before it even began. To frame my concern as a quaint, sisterly overreaction, I pushed a small stack of catalogs across the table towards him. "These came," I said, my voice even. I let him pick them up. Then, I slid the single cream-colored envelope to the center of the table between us. "This also came for Leo," I said. I opened it by mistake. I was concerned. "It looks serious." He glanced down. I watched his eyes, the only part of him he couldn't completely control, flicker with a microsecond of pure, undiluted annoyance before the mask of effortless charm slid perfectly back into place. He chuckled, a deep, reassuring sound. "Oh, this," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "My God, the paperwork for a startup is an absolute nightmare. This is just a bridge loan for the business. All very standard. The bank must have put it in Leo's name by mistake instead of the LLC. You know how these small-town banks are. So archaic. I'll get it sorted out on Monday." His explanation was as smooth and polished as the river stones on the banks of the Nashua. It was also a complete and utter lie. "A personal loan?" I asked, my gaze level. "I thought your investors were funding everything." My question was quiet, but it was not gentle. It was a sharp, pointed probe into the flimsy fabric of his story. He didn't flinch. "They are. Of course, they are. This is just a cash flow thing to cover some equipment purchases while the next round of funding clears. It's incredibly boring business stuff." He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, patronizing tone. "Honestly, Ellie, you shouldn't worry your head about it. That's what I'm here for. To handle the complicated stuff so Leo doesn't have to." He stood up, the conversation clearly over as far as he was concerned. He placed a hand on my shoulder. A gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a brand. "I'll take care of it. Tell Leo not to worry." He smiled that million-dollar smile one last time and walked away. His expensive shoes clicking softly on the worn floorboards. I sat there in the deafening silence. The grandfather clock ticking off the seconds. The numbness in my hands had receded, leaving a dull, residual tingle, a physical echo of the encounter. I looked at the loan notice still sitting on the table. A $50,000 clerical error. A business loan in a history teacher's name. It was absurd. It was insulting. I looked around at the shelves that held the history of my town. The ledgers that recorded every birth, every death, every property deed for 200 years. They were books of facts, of truths, and I knew, with a certainty that settled in my gut like a block of ice, that I had just been fed a series of well-rehearsed lies. Julian hadn't just dismissed my concern, he had dismissed me. My brother was a pawn in a game I didn't understand. The battle for his future had just been silently, politely declared right here, in the quietest room in town. And I, the quiet librarian, was the only one who had heard the trumpet sound. Julian's explanation was meant to be a closed door, a final, placating word on the matter. But for me, it was a key. His mistake wasn't in the lie itself, but in its sloppiness. He'd underestimated me, and more importantly, he'd underestimated my town. Northwood Savings and Loan, the bank he'd so casually dismissed as archaic, was run by Carol McGregor. I'd personally helped both of her sons with their summer reading lists for the last 5 years. Carol didn't run the kind of bank that, accidentally, put a $50,000 high-risk loan in the name of the wrong person. The lie was too big, too clumsy for a small town. He was counting on no one checking. He was counting on me being just a quiet librarian. That night, sleep was a distant country I had no visa for. After locking the library's heavy oak doors, I didn't go home. I went back to my office. The small, book-lined room that felt more like home than my own apartment. The library after dark has a different soul. It's a place of deep, cathedral-like silence, where the only sounds were the hum of the servers in the basement and the frantic, determined clicking of my keyboard. Bathed in the cold blue glow of my monitor, I poured the last of the day's lukewarm coffee into a mug and went to work. My life is spent in the pursuit of information, and I had the entire arsenal of a modern library at my fingertips. This wasn't just a Google search. This was a deep dive, using the powerful subscription databases the town paid for, the tools that could peel back the skin of the internet and show the bones underneath. I started with the lender from the notice, Apex Financial Group. The name sounded solid, reassuring. The reality was anything but. A quick search on our business credit database revealed it wasn't a bank at all. It was a private hard money lender based out of Delaware, specializing in high-interest, short-term loans for high-risk clients. They were loan sharks in suits. The kind of people you went to when every legitimate door had been closed in your face. Why would a successful startup, on the verge of a massive payday, need a desperate last resort loan like this? Next, I turned my attention to Julian Croft. His digital footprint was pristine, almost unnervingly so. A polished LinkedIn profile listed him as the founder and CEO of Athelred Innovations. It was full of corporate buzzwords like disruptor, thought leader, and innovator. There were a few puff pieces in minor Boston business blogs from a couple of years back, celebrating him as an entrepreneur to watch. It all felt meticulously curated. A digital life as carefully constructed as a museum exhibit. Too perfect. The real story began to emerge when I accessed the Massachusetts Secretary of State's Public Records database and searched for his company. Athelred Innovations, LLC. There it was, registered 18 months ago, but the address listed wasn't some gleaming office in Boston's Seaport District. It was a P.O. box at a UPS store in a strip mall in Revere, sandwiched between a nail salon and a pizza place. This was the entrance to the rabbit hole. My heart hammered a steady, anxious rhythm against my ribs. I cross-referenced the LLC with other business filings. What I found made the tingling in my hands return with a vengeance. Athelred Innovations, LLC was wholly owned by another entity, the Croft Strategic Group, LLC, and that LLC was, in turn, owned by a holding company called North Star Holdings, Inc. I grabbed a legal pad and began to sketch it out, my pen scratching in the silence. It was a spiderweb, a nesting doll of anonymous corporate entities designed for one purpose: to make it impossible to see who truly owned what, and where the money was actually going. With a growing sense of dread, I pivoted my search. I started looking for the company's work, its substance. I searched news archives for press releases, product launches, partnership announcements. There was nothing beyond the initial filing. I searched tech journals, industry forums, and review sites. Nothing. It was a ghost. A real tech startup, even one in its early stages, has a gravitational pull. It hires people. It has to. I went to LinkedIn, to Indeed, to every major job site. I searched for Athelred Innovations. 0 results found. No job postings for software engineers. No listings for project managers. No call for a sales team. The only employee listed anywhere on the entire internet was Julian Croft, CEO. The company's website was a masterpiece of deception. It was sleek, professional, and loaded with stock photos of smiling, diverse millennials in a bright, airy office space. It spoke of revolutionizing the future of delivery and optimizing the last-mile solution. But it was all air. There was no About Us page with a team roster. There was no video demo of their revolutionary software. There were no client testimonials. It was a beautiful, hollow digital storefront with nothing for sale. I leaned back, the worn leather of my office chair groaning in protest. The picture was coming into focus, sharp and terrifying. Athelred Innovations wasn't a struggling startup. It wasn't a real company at all. It was a concept, a phantom built of buzzwords, designed to do one thing: attract investment money. The final, damning puzzle pieces fell into place when I widened my search to include Julian's name alongside terms like scam, fraud, and investor complaint. The algorithm churned for a moment before spitting out a link to an archived community forum from a Boston neighborhood blog. Dated 3 years ago, the post was about another one of Julian's brilliant ventures, a real estate app called Hearth. The comments section was a graveyard of broken trust. Julian Croft is a con man. Took $20,000 of my father's retirement money and vanished. Hearth was a total sham. He showed us a fancy presentation. Promised huge returns. Once he got our money, he stopped returning calls. This guy is a professional snake oil salesman. Someone needs to stop him before he ruins more lives. I read dozens of them. The pattern was undeniable. He would move into a community, build a reputation, charm a circle of trusting, hopeful people, and then bleed them dry before disappearing and starting over somewhere new. Somewhere like Northwood. The first rays of dawn were beginning to slice through the tall, arched windows of the library, casting long, skeletal shadows across the room. I looked at my screen. At the web of lies I had untangled through the night. The angry, desperate comments of his past victims. The labyrinth of shell corporations. The high-interest loan. It was all connected. My entire body ached with a weariness that went beyond lack of sleep. The tingling in my hands had become a constant, dull hum, a physical manifestation of the poison I had uncovered. This wasn't just about a single fraudulent loan, or protecting my brother from a bad marriage. This was bigger. Julian was methodically building a house of cards right in the heart of my town. And he was using my brother, the kindest, most trusting man I had ever known, as its foundation. My fear, the cold, amorphous dread I'd been feeling for weeks, had finally solidified into something hard and clear. I knew what Julian was. The question that echoed in the silent, sunlit library was no longer what was happening, but what in God's name was I going to do about it? How do you prove the devil exists to a brother who believes he's living in paradise? The sun was high in the sky, but I felt like I was still trapped in the pre-dawn gloom of my office. Armed with a night's worth of damning evidence, I drove through the familiar, winding roads of Northwood. Each turn was a memory, a ghost of a life that felt simpler, safer. I had printed everything: the damning loan notice, the spiderweb chart of shell corporations, the heartbroken and furious comments from the Boston Investor Forum. I placed them in a simple manila folder, which sat on the passenger seat beside me. It felt heavier than a tombstone. There was no way to do this over the phone. I couldn't text a picture of betrayal. I had to do this in person. I had to look my brother in the eye and pray he could see the truth through the fog of love. Pulling into the driveway of our childhood home felt like a trespass. Julian's sleek, black Tesla was parked where our father's sensible Ford sedan used to be. The cheerful yellow front door of my youth had been repainted a glossy, impersonal gray. Leo opened it before I could knock. A wide, easy smile on his face that immediately faltered when he saw my expression. Everything okay? We need to talk, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. He led me inside. The house was a beautiful, painful stranger. The comfortable, chintz armchair where our mother used to read had been replaced by a severe, low-profile leather sofa. An enormous, chaotic piece of abstract art hung where a gallery wall of clumsy family photos used to be. The air didn't smell like cinnamon and old books anymore. It smelled of sandalwood and bergamot, pumped into the air from a small, black diffuser on the mantelpiece. Every change was a quiet erasure. And it felt like Julian wasn't just redecorating a house, but systematically deleting a history. My history. Julian's out, Leo said, as if sensing my unease. On a call with some West Coast investors. Big stuff. He tried to keep his voice light, but he was watching me, his guard already up. We sat in the living room, a polite distance between us on the cold leather sofa. I placed the manila folder on the glass coffee table between us. The clack of the cardboard against the glass sounded like a gavel. I didn't want to do this. Leo, I started, my voice soft, but after that check bounced, I got worried, and I started looking into things. I opened the folder, with my hands shaking just slightly, a tremor I prayed he wouldn't notice. I laid out the papers one by one. I was calm. I was methodical. I presented it not as an accusation, but as a puzzle we needed to solve together. This is the loan, Leo. It's in your name only. It's from a predatory lender. I showed him the flowchart. This is Athelred. It doesn't seem to be a real company. It's a network of P.O. boxes and anonymous LLCs. Finally, I slid the printed forum comments across the glass. And these are people from Boston. People who say Julian did the same thing to them 3 years ago. I watched his face as he looked at the evidence, expecting to see confusion, then doubt, then the slow, dawning horror of realization. But I saw none of it. I saw his jaw tighten. I saw his brow furrow not in thought, but in anger. He wasn't looking at the evidence. He was looking at me. And in his eyes, I was not his savior. I was his enemy. I can't believe you, he whispered, his voice tight with a fury I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. He pushed the papers away. A gesture of violent dismissal. I cannot believe you are doing this. You spent the night, what? Spying? Hacking into my husband's life because of a single bounced check? It's not just the check. Leo, look at this. No, he shot back, standing up and beginning to pace the room, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure agitation. I don't need to look at it, because I already know what it is. It's a bunch of half-truths and out-of-context garbage that you've twisted into some insane conspiracy. Julian had gotten to him first. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Julian had seen the suspicion in my eyes at the library and had spent the last 2 days poisoning the well. Preparing the battlefield. It's a complex business, Ellie. Leo was practically shouting now, parroting lines I was sure he'd been fed. Of course it looks weird to you. These are probably just disgruntled ex-partners. Business is ugly. People get jealous. Jealous? I stood up to face him. Leo, these people lost their life savings. And you believe a bunch of anonymous trolls on the internet over your own family? He shot back. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was making Julian his family. And in the same breath, he was making me a stranger. He took a step closer. And his voice dropped, becoming crueler, more precise. He was aiming for my weakest points. The insecurities he knew better than anyone. You know what this is really about? He said, his eyes hard. You've never liked him. Not from day one. You've never once just been happy for me. Because you sit in that dusty library and you think no one is good enough. You can't stand to see me building a life. A real, successful life. With someone else. That's not true, I whispered, but my voice was weak. The words were a direct hit. Isn't it? He pressed on. Relentless. It's always been this way with you. Ever since Mom and Dad. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The ghost of that night, the slick roads, the blinding headlights, the screech of metal, was always there. Just beneath the surface of our lives. You think you have to control everything, he said, his voice thick with years of resentment I never knew he carried. You have to be the responsible one. The protector. But I don't need your protection. I'm a grown man. I am in love. I am happy. For the first time in a long, long time. Why is that so hard for you to accept? Why can't you just let me be happy? Tears were streaming down my face now. Hot and silent. He was twisting my love into a weapon against me. He was making my concern into a pathology. I was no longer his sister. I was a bitter, controlling spinster, clinging to a past he was desperate to escape. I was fighting a war on 2 fronts. Against Julian's intricate web of lies. And against my brother's desperate, powerful need to believe in them. Leo, please, I begged, my voice breaking. Please, just look at the facts. Just call the lender. Just ask one question. He shook his head, a gesture of finality. No, I want you to leave, he said, his voice flat and cold. He wouldn't even look at me. And I don't want to hear another word about this. Julian is my husband. He is my family. And you are crossing a line you will not be able to uncross. Family. The word was a dagger. He had redefined it, drawn a new circle, and I was on the outside. I walked out of the house I grew up in without another word. Leaving the manila folder, my proof, my truth, my desperate attempt to save him, abandoned on the cold glass table of a stranger's living room. As I drove away, the familiar streets of my town felt alien, hostile. I had lost him. In my attempt to save my brother from a con man, I had handed him over completely. I pulled the car over at a scenic overlook. The whole of Northwood spread out below me in the afternoon sun. A perfect, picturesque lie. The numbness was back in my hands. A dull, throbbing ache that mirrored the one in my chest. I had the truth. A truth I had unearthed at great personal cost. But it was worthless. It was a currency no one would accept. Least of all the one person in the world I was trying to save. I was utterly, completely alone. Of course. Here is the fifth part of The Northwood Ledger. This is the story's pivotal chapter, where Ellie's personal crisis collides with her family crusade, forging her fear and grief into a weapon of cold, hard resolve. Part 5. The Ticking Clock. The days that followed my confrontation with Leo were the longest of my life. Silence became a physical presence in my small apartment. A heavy, suffocating blanket. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, reaching for my phone to text him, only to see the single, unanswered plea I'd sent hours after our fight: "Please, just talk to me." The lack of response was its own brutal answer. I had been excommunicated. My body, always a reliable barometer of my emotional state, began to betray me in small, humiliating ways. The tingling in my hands became a persistent, infuriating numbness. I dropped a heavy volume of Thoreau on the library floor, its spine cracking with a sound that echoed the breaking of my own. I watched a coffee mug slip from my grasp and shatter on my kitchen tile. And I didn't have the energy to clean it up. I just stared at the spreading brown stain, a perfect metaphor for the mess my life had become. There was nothing left to do but face the other ghost that had been haunting me. I had a long scheduled appointment with a neurologist at Mass General. A follow-up to the MRI I'd had weeks ago. It was an appointment I had been dreading. A truth I wasn't ready to name. But now, with the silence from my brother's house screaming in my ears, the clinical quiet of a doctor's office felt like a welcome reprieve. Dr. Aris was a kind man with tired eyes who didn't waste time with small talk. The examination room was sterile and cold, smelling faintly of antiseptic wipes. I sat on the edge of the exam table, the crinkling of the paper beneath me unnervingly loud in the stillness. He clipped my MRI scans onto a lightbox, and the room was suddenly filled with the ghostly, luminous images of my own brain and spinal cord. "You see these areas here," he said, his voice gentle as he pointed to a series of bright white smudges that looked like thumbprints on a dusty window. "And here, along the cervical spine, these are lesions, sclerotic plaques, to be precise. They're indicative of demyelination." He kept talking, using words like autoimmune response and axonal damage. But my mind snagged on one. Lesions. It was such a small, neat word for a wound. A wound on the inside, where no one could see it. He finally turned to me, his expression compassionate but direct. "Ellie, your symptoms, combined with what we're seeing on these scans, confirm a diagnosis of relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis." The name landed in the sterile air between us. Multiple sclerosis. It wasn't a shock. I'd spent enough late nights in my own library's medical databases to know what my symptoms pointed to. But the finality of it was like a door slamming shut. His voice seemed to recede as he began to talk about treatment plans. Injectable medications, managing flare-ups, the unpredictable, progressive nature of the disease. It was a life sentence. Not of death, but of uncertainty. I stared at a small crack in the ceiling plaster, focusing on its jagged, random path, a map to nowhere. The drive home from Boston was a blur of gray highway and monotonous rhythm. The steady thump-thump of the tires on the pavement was a hypnotic drumbeat, pulling a memory from the depths. A memory I spent most of my life trying to outrun. Flashback. The rain is a torrent, lashing against the windshield of our old station wagon. The wipers struggle to keep pace, their frantic squeak a metronome marking the time of my own teenage indignation. I'm 17, furious about my 11 p.m. curfew. "It's not fair," I'm saying to my mother, turning from the road for a fatal second to emphasize my point. Sarah's parents let her stay out until 1. My dad, in the passenger seat, is trying to play peacemaker. "Ellie, watch the road, honey. The Cranberries are on the radio." That mournful, soaring chorus of "Zombie." In the rearview mirror, I can see Leo, just 9 years old, his head leaning against the window, humming along, lost in his own small world. I turn back to the road just in time to see it, the blinding glare of headlights. A truck jackknifing across the slick, black asphalt. My mother screams my name. I hear the horrifying screech of tires failing to find purchase. My father's single, sharp shout of, "Ellie!" And then, the sound of the world tearing apart. I came back to myself with a gasp. My hands gripping the steering wheel of my own car. My knuckles white. The memory never came with the crash itself. It always ended with the sounds. The sounds. And the crushing, absolute silence that followed. My 1 second of selfish teenage anger. An argument about a curfew. That's what their lives had been worth. That's the ledger I've been trying to balance ever since. The debt I can never repay. My penance was the silent promise I'd made to whatever was left of the universe. I would spend the rest of my life looking after Leo. I would not fail him again. And in that moment, in the anonymous river of traffic on the Mass Pike, the two great, terrifying truths of my life collided and fused into one. The diagnosis wasn't a life sentence. It was a deadline. My fight for Leo wasn't just about protecting him from a conman anymore. It was about fulfilling the sacred, defining promise of my life. The MS was a ticking clock. I didn't know how much time I had before my body betrayed me further. Before my hands became too numb to type. Before my mind became clouded with the fog I'd read so much about. I had a finite window of strength and clarity to secure his future. To dismantle the trap Julian had set before it snapped shut. To save him in the one way I still could. My grief and despair from Leo's rejection began to burn away. Replaced by something colder, harder, a new, terrifying clarity. My brother was just the first domino. I thought about the names on the town's Founders' Day picnic sign-up sheet. The small business owners. The retirees like Mr. Abernathy who had spent their lives building a nest egg in this town. Julian wasn't just conning Leo, he was conning Northwood. As I took the exit ramp, the familiar steeple of the Northwood Congregational Church rising against the bruised twilight sky, I felt a profound shift inside me. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface. But it was no longer in control. My quiet, ordered life was over. The role of the grieving sister, the isolated victim, was a luxury I could no longer afford. I parked in my designated spot behind the library. As I got out of the car, I consciously felt the weight of the key in my palm. The cold, solid reality of it, the numbness in my fingers seemed to recede, replaced by the thrum of pure, unadulterated purpose. I was no longer a librarian trying to check out a book of facts. I was a woman with an incurable disease, a final duty to perform, and absolutely nothing left to lose. My newfound resolve was a cold, sharp thing, but I knew it wasn't enough. I had a story full of shadows and monstrous implications. But to bring it into the light, I needed more than just a librarian's research skills. I had the what, but I needed the how. I needed someone who spoke the language of numbers. Someone who could translate Julian's corporate shell game into the cold, hard vocabulary of financial crime. The name came to me as I was reshelving books in the local history section. Arthur Abernathy. For 40 years, Arthur had been the town's most respected CPA. He was a man of unimpeachable integrity, a relic from an era where a handshake meant more than a contract. He'd handled the books for my father's hardware store, and I knew him as a quiet, meticulous man who donated generously to the library's expansion fund every year. I also remembered his name from a puff piece in the Northwood Chronicle a few months back. Listed proudly among the first local, seed investors, in Athelred Innovations. Julian had hooked the biggest fish in the pond to give his scam the veneer of legitimacy. A phone call felt too easy to dismiss. An email too impersonal. This required an act of old-fashioned, small-town respect. That afternoon, I drove to his house. A modest and impeccably maintained Cape Cod on a street lined with mature maple trees. I walked up the flagstone path, my manila folder feeling thin and inadequate in my hands, and rang the bell. He answered the door himself. He was in his late 70s, hawk-nosed and sharp-eyed, wearing a worn but clean cardigan over a collared shirt. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "Eleanor, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice steady. "I apologize for showing up unannounced. I was hoping I might have a word with you. It's a matter of some delicacy." He studied my face for a long moment, and in his gaze, I saw the quiet, analytical mind of an accountant taking my measure. He seemed to find what he was looking for. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." He led me to his home office. The room was a sanctuary of quiet, masculine order. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and the sweet, lingering scent of his grandfather's pipe tobacco. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were filled not with novels, but with decades of identical, neatly labeled financial binders. On his mahogany desk, a vintage adding machine stood like a monument beside a modern computer. This was a room where numbers didn't lie. "Please," he said, gesturing to a leather armchair. I sat, and he settled behind his desk, folding his hands. The silence stretched, and I knew the first move was mine. "Mr. Abernathy," I began, deciding a direct approach was the only way to honor a man like him. "I'm here because I have a personal connection to a recent investment of yours. The one in Athelred Innovations." His posture changed instantly. It was subtle, but his shoulders tightened, and his expression became guarded. Shuttered. "That's a private financial matter, Eleanor," he said, his tone polite but firm. The use of my first name was a gentle warning, a drawing of a boundary. "I understand," I said, leaning forward. "My brother, Leo, is also involved. He's married to Julian Croft." I let that hang in the air for a second. "And I have discovered information that leads me to believe the company is not what it presents itself to be." He didn't respond, his face an unreadable mask of professional restraint. He was a proud man. And I knew that for him, a bad investment wasn't just a financial loss, it was a personal, professional failure. I reached into my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Not the loan, not the angry forum comments. Just the printout of the LLC registration, with the address of the UPS store in Revere clearly visible. I slid it across the gleaming surface of his desk. He picked it up, putting on his reading glasses. He read it once, then twice. I watched as a faint spot of color appeared high on his cheeks. He, Arthur Abernathy, the man who could spot a padded expense report from 100 paces, had invested $75,000 of his retirement fund into a company registered to a strip mall P.O. box. I hadn't attacked his judgment, I had presented him with a fact that insulted his intelligence. And that was far more effective. He placed the paper down carefully, aligning it with the edge of his desk blotter. "What else have you found?" he asked. And just like that, the wall was down. For the next hour, I walked him through everything: the shell corporations, the phantom employees, the trail of burned investors in Boston. I didn't embellish, I just presented the data I had gathered. He listened without interruption, his sharp eyes fixed on me, occasionally making a small note on a legal pad with a perfectly sharpened pencil. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring at the paper with the strip mall address. "He was so smooth," Arthur said, almost to himself. I asked him about his burn rate, his capitalization table, his vesting schedule. He had an answer for everything. Vague, now that I think about it. Full of jargon, but confident. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the deep, personal shame in his eyes. He used my name, didn't he? In the paper, to get others to invest. "Yes," I said softly, "I think he did." "The scoundrel," he whispered, and in that moment, our alliance was forged. It was an unspoken pact between two quiet, methodical people who had been insulted by a liar. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense, clandestine work. We became a secret, two-person task force. Most evenings, after the library closed, I would go to his house. We'd work for hours in his quiet, tobacco-scented office. Our skills were perfectly complementary. I was the digital hunter, navigating the dark forests of public records, corporate databases, and archived web pages. I would bring him the raw data, a wire transfer confirmation, an SEC filing for a defunct company, a property deed. He was the interpreter, the master of the ledger. He would take the information and illuminate the crimes hidden within it. He'd spread the documents on his desk under the warm glow of his banker's lamp, his old adding machine clattering as he cross-referenced figures. "See this?" he'd say, his finger tracing a line on a bank statement. He used the initial investment from the Miller family to pay a dividend to the Carters. Classic Ponzi scheme. That's wire fraud. It's a federal offense. He taught me the language of the enemy. I provided the digital footprints. He provided the legal and financial context that turned them into weapons. We uncovered the full, sickening scope of it. Julian had charmed his way into the retirement accounts of at least a dozen people in our community, amassing nearly $500,000 in fraudulent investments. We weren't just gathering gossip, we were building a case. A bulletproof dossier of evidence. Arthur was meticulous. Every claim was cross-referenced. Every number verified. Every document tabbed and annotated in his precise, elegant script. One evening, after a particularly long session, we finished. On his desk sat a thick, 3-inch binder, organized with color-coded tabs. It was a complete and total chronicle of Julian's lies. From the first fraudulent loan to the last illegal wire transfer. Arthur leaned back in his chair, looking at the binder with a grim satisfaction. "You know, Eleanor," he said, his voice weary but firm. "For 45 years, I crunched numbers to help people build things, businesses, homes, futures. I never thought I'd spend my retirement crunching them to tear something down." I looked at the dossier. It was more than just a collection of papers. It was our truth. It was our ammunition. My profound isolation had finally ended. I had an ally, a plan, and a weapon heavy with the weight of irrefutable facts. The quiet librarian and the retired accountant were ready for battle, and we knew exactly where it needed to be fought. Of course, here is the 7th part of the Northwood Ledger. This is the climax of the entire narrative, the moment where all of Ellie's quiet, clandestine work explodes into the public square, in a confrontation that will change the town and her family forever. Part 7. The Town Hall Takedown. The Northwood Town Hall smells of floor polish, damp wool coats, and 2 centuries of tedious public discourse. On the second Tuesday of the quarter, it's where the town's real business gets done. I sat in one of the hard, polished wooden pews in the back, the heavy dossier resting on my lap like a sleeping dragon. Beside me, Arthur Abernathy sat ramrod straight, his hands folded over the head of his cane, his expression grim and resolute. Across the hall, I could see them, Leo and Julian, sitting in the front row like the town's royal couple. Julian, in a perfectly tailored navy suit, would lean over occasionally and whisper something in my brother's ear, making Leo laugh. Leo looked so proud, so full of a bright, uncomplicated happiness that it felt like a physical blow. He caught my eye once, and his smile faltered, replaced by a cool, disappointed look before he turned away. He hadn't spoken to me in 3 weeks. My presence here was a betrayal he could no longer ignore. I felt a familiar, dull ache spread through my hands, but I clenched them into fists, welcoming the pain. It was a reminder that I was still here, still fighting. The first hour of the meeting was a masterclass in civic monotony. A debate over funding for new snowplows. An announcement about the annual Thanksgiving food drive. I watched the big, slow-moving hands on the clock tower, the one my great-grandfather built, creep toward 8 o'clock. Finally, Mayor Thompson, a well-meaning man whose ambition had always outpaced his acumen, stepped up to the podium. And now, he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. For a very exciting moment, it is my distinct honor to present the first-ever Northwood Community Business Grant, an award designed to foster local innovation and bring our beloved town into the 21st century. A polite smattering of applause. This year's recipient, the mayor continued, beaming, is a man whose vision and dynamism have already made a tremendous impact on our community. He is a true innovator, a leader who promises not just profits, but progress. Please join me in congratulating Mr. Julian Croft and Athelred Innovations. The applause was thunderous this time. Julian stood up, kissed Leo on the cheek, and strode onto the stage, shaking the mayor's hand as he accepted an oversized ceremonial check for $25,000. He turned to the crowd, his face a perfect mask of humility and gratitude. He waited for the applause to die down, then tapped the microphone. "Thank you, Mayor," he began, his voice smooth as velvet. "Thank you to the board, and thank you to this incredible town for welcoming me, for believing in me. All I've ever wanted to do with Athelred is build something that will give back to the community that has so generously given me a home. Your faith. This was it. It was now or never. I stood up. The scraping of my pew leg on the wooden floor was a gunshot in the quiet hall. Mayor Thompson, I said, my voice, amplified by the room's natural acoustics, was shockingly loud, but it didn't tremble. I apologize for the interruption. Every head in the room swiveled towards me. A confused, angry murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see Leo's shoulders tense. Julian's smile froze on his face. Before you officially award a grant of taxpayer money, I continued, my voice gaining strength, there is information the Select Board, and every citizen of this town, has a right to hear. Mayor Thompson sputtered, his face turning red. Ms. Vance, this is highly irregular. Ellie, what are you doing? Julian said from the stage, his voice a perfect blend of concern and condescension. I'm sure whatever this is can wait. This isn't the time or the place for a family disagreement. I ignored them both, clutching the heavy binder to my chest. I walked down the center aisle, the eyes of the entire town following my every step. I didn't look at Leo. I couldn't. I walked to the public comment podium, set the dossier down, and opened it. I looked directly at the 5 members of the Select Board sitting on the stage beside a deeply uncomfortable Mayor Thompson. My name is Eleanor Vance, I said into the microphone, my voice clear and steady. And for the last month, I have been investigating Athelred innovations. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply presented the facts. My voice as calm and methodical as if I were giving a report at a library board meeting. Athelred Innovations is not a real company. I began. Its registered corporate address is not in Boston. It is a United Parcel Service P.O. box in a strip mall in Revere. As I spoke, Arthur Abernathy, using a remote from his seat, brought the first image up on the projector screen behind the stage, a bleak photo of the strip mall. The UPS store logo clearly visible. A collective gasp went through the hall. The company has no product, no patents, and no employees, other than Mr. Croft himself. I continued, my voice gaining momentum. It is a facade, a shell company created for the sole purpose of soliciting investment funds under false pretenses. Funds that Mr. Croft has solicited from at least a dozen members of our community, some of whom are in this room tonight. The murmuring grew louder, more agitated. People were turning in their pews, looking at their neighbors, a contagion of suspicion spreading through the room. Julian, on stage, was no longer smiling. This is slander, he snapped. This is a malicious, unfounded attack. I went to the next page in my binder. Mr. Croft has been using the money from recent investors to pay fraudulent dividends to his earliest investors, creating the illusion of a profitable company, a practice which has a name. I paused and looked towards the back of the room. Mr. Abernathy? Arthur stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. His voice, though aged, was firm. The practice is called a Ponzi scheme. It is a federal crime. The word, crime, silenced the crowd. Julian's face had gone pale under the stage lights. To secure the initial financing for this scheme, I said, my eyes finally moving to lock on my brother, who was staring at me, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. Mr. Croft has taken out a series of high-interest, predatory loans. He did not, however, take them out in his own name. He took them out in the name of his husband, my brother, Leo Vance. Leo physically flinched, as if I had struck him. This is a private family matter, Julian shouted, his voice losing its smooth veneer, cracking with desperation. Mayor, I demand you put a stop to this personal vendetta. This stopped being a family matter. Julian, I said, my voice dropping but my eyes never leaving his. The moment you decided to defraud an entire town. And it stopped being a private matter when you used my family's deepest tragedy as your own personal seed money. I held up the final document, a copy of a bank transfer. My hands were shaking now. But I didn't care. There is one more thing this town needs to know, I said, my voice thick with a grief I could no longer contain. The initial, foundational investment Mr. Croft used to secure these loans and begin this entire scam was not his. It was the inheritance money my brother and I received after our parents, Thomas and Claire Vance, were killed in a car accident 20 years ago. A wave of shock and horror washed over the room. A single, collective gasp of a community that remembered Tom and Claire Vance. That had mourned them. This was the ultimate sacrilege. Julian hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen from the dead. He had desecrated a memory. I finally looked at my brother. And my voice broke. He took the money our parents left to protect you. Leo, I said, the words a raw, ragged whisper that the microphone carried to every corner of the hall. He took it, and he used it to build this entire world of lies. The room exploded. The mayor was stammering into the microphone for order. People were on their feet, shouting, but I didn't see any of it. I only saw my brother. Leo was staring at his husband, and in his eyes, I saw the beautiful, intricate cathedral of his love and trust being utterly demolished, crashing down into dust and ruin in the space of a single, horrifying moment. He looked completely and utterly broken. Through the chaos, I saw a single, clear movement. Chief Brody, who had been standing impassively by the back wall, began to walk slowly and deliberately down the center aisle, his eyes fixed on the man trapped in the spotlight on the stage. The town's judgment was coming. The ledger was finally, irrevocably, being balanced. The chaos in the town hall subsided not into silence, but into a thick, buzzing hum of hushed conversations, of shocked whispers and horrified postmortems. I watched as Chief Brody placed a quiet hand on Julian's arm. There was no struggle. The fight had gone out of him. The charisma and confidence evaporating under the harsh stage lights, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. As they escorted him from the stage, his eyes met mine for a brief, fleeting second. There was no anger in them. There was nothing at all. My gaze went to the front pew. Leo was still sitting there, a statue carved from grief, staring at the empty space on the stage where his life had just been publicly dismantled. The townspeople, in a rare, collective act of grace, gave him a wide berth, their pity and shock creating a protective bubble of isolation around him. I made my way down the aisle, the floorboards groaning under my feet. Arthur Abernathy caught my arm as I passed, his grip surprisingly firm. "You did the right thing, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the swirling sea of voices. "The necessary thing." I nodded, unable to speak, and continued on. I slid into the pew beside my brother. The polished wood was cool against my skin. For a long minute, we just sat in the echoing, near-empty hall, a small, silent island. The scent of old wood and righteous indignation hung in the air. "Leo," I said softly, "let's go home." The word felt strange, unmoored. Not his home, which was now a crime scene of the heart. Not my apartment, which had been my war room. Just home. An idea, a direction. He finally turned to look at me. And the anger, the pride, the bitter resentment from our last encounter were all gone. His eyes were hollowed out, vacant with a grief so profound it seemed to have swallowed him whole. He didn't speak. He just gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The drive to my apartment was a silent, 20-minute eternity. Leo stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar, comforting lights of our town slide past as if he'd never seen them before. As if he were a stranger in his own life. Up in my apartment, the silence continued. I made him tea, the way our mother used to, in her old porcelain pot. I wrapped him in the heavy, hand-stitched quilt she had made for his college dorm room. A patchwork of memories in faded flannel. I didn't offer platitudes or apologies. I just offered presence. I sat in the armchair across from him, listening to the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. And I waited. It was almost midnight when he finally spoke. His voice a dry, hoarse whisper, the sound of something breaking. "All of it?" he asked, his eyes fixed on a loose thread on the quilt. "The laughter? The plans we made? Was any of it real?" It was the only question that mattered. And it had no easy answer. I chose my words carefully, knowing they could either be a bomb or another wound. "I think," I said softly, "the man you fell in love with felt real to you, Leo, and that's a truth no one can take away. The life he built around that love, that was the lie. That was what it took." A single, racking sob tore through him. A sound of such pure, undiluted pain that it felt like it could shatter glass. He curled in on himself, The big, strong man I'd watched grow up. Now just a heartbroken boy wrapped in his mother's quilt. He wept for the man he thought he knew. For the future he thought he had. For the home that was no longer a home. He wept for the sacrilege of our parents' memory. And for the bright, beautiful lie he had loved with all his heart. I moved to the sofa and sat beside him, pulling him close. My own exhaustion, the dull, persistent ache in my own body, was forgotten. For the first time in weeks. We were not accuser and defendant. We were not warrior and casualty. We were just what we had always been. Underneath it all. The only family each other had left. The story jumps forward 3 months. The New England autumn has bled into the stark, quiet beauty of early winter. Julian Croft took a plea deal, wire fraud, grand larceny. He gave up the names of his associates in Boston to lessen his sentence. Most of the money was gone, vanished into the digital ether of bad debts and desperate gambles. Arthur Abernathy, true to his word, formed a victims' coalition, and his meticulous dossier became the backbone of the prosecution's case. He was helping the families, including ours, navigate the slow, frustrating process of restitution. The town was healing, its gossip turning from shock to a quiet, resilient support. The final scene is not in a courtroom or a town hall. It's in the quiet, beige waiting room of my neurologist's office. It smells of hand sanitizer and stale magazines. I'm here for my first follow-up since starting treatment. And Leo is with me. He drove me, he insisted. He reaches over and takes my hand. His is warm and steady. Mine has a slight, almost imperceptible tremor. Are you scared? He asks. His voice quiet. Sometimes. I admit, I look at our joined hands. Are you? All the time, he says, and his honesty is a gift. I'm so sorry, for everything, for not listening to you, for what I said. We were both just trying to get through it. Leo, I say, squeezing his hand, in our own ways. We were both just trying to balance the ledger. The door to the inner office opens, and a nurse calls my name. Eleanor Vance? We both stand up. Leo doesn't let go of my hand. He looks at me, his eyes clear for the first time in years, free of the shadow of Julian's influence, but filled with a new, sober understanding of the world. We'll face this, he says, and for the first time, he uses the word, we, to mean only the two of us. A circle of two against the world. Together. I nod, a lump forming in my throat. I don't know what the future holds for my health, for my strength, for the life I thought I had planned. The inheritance is gone. Our childhood home is being sold. The trust between us is still a fragile, healing thing. But as I turn and walk toward the doctor's door, my brother's hand held firmly in mine, I know we are not walking toward an ending. We are walking toward a new beginning. And we are, finally, walking through the door together. How well do we truly know the people we love? And what happens when that love requires us to confront a truth so painful that it threatens to shatter everything we hold dear? Our story, The Northwood Ledger, is more than just a drama about lies and betrayal. It's a deep dive into the fierce, often difficult, reality of unconditional love. It's about the courage it takes to listen to that quiet, nagging voice inside, our intuition, that tells us when a beautiful story is just a little too perfect to be true. So often in life, we are taught that love means unwavering support. But sometimes, the greatest act of love is to be the lone voice of dissent. To risk a cherished relationship in order to protect the person on the other side of it. Life will inevitably present us with our own ticking clocks and impossible choices. We may face betrayals that make us question our own judgment or challenges that test the very limits of our strength. But the ultimate lesson isn't just about learning to see through the beautiful lies. It's about what happens after they've been exposed. It's about discovering who is still standing beside you in the quiet aftermath. In the ashes of the life you thought you had. True strength isn't found in never falling for a lie, but in having the courage to get back up, to face the truth, and to begin the slow, difficult work of rebuilding on a foundation of what is real and true. This story is a reminder that we are all more resilient than we know. If you've ever had to fight for a truth that no one else wanted to see, or found strength in the wake of a life-altering challenge, we'd be honored if you shared a piece of your story in the comments below. Wishing you all strength and clarity.